Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. So far, the two previous episodes seem to have gotten a lot of interest, so I'll continue covering California penal institutions. Today I'm going to cover San Quentin State Prison, which is California's oldest correctional institution, tracing its origins back to 1852. San Quentin rests atop of 432 acres overlooking the San Francisco Bay Area and is located just 12 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County. The prison encompasses 4 large cell blocks, west, south, north, and east, along with the Adjustment Center, which is a restricted housing area, a central healthcare services building, a medium security dorm setting, and a minimum security firehouse. Until recently, it was the state's only death row for male inmates, and was the largest in the United States. But most of the former death row population, with very few exceptions, have now been moved to general population in other California penal institutions as of May 28, 2024. The prison has been featured on film, radio drama, video, podcasts, and television, and has been the subject of many books. It has hosted many concerts, and has also housed many notorious inmates. It also has experienced violence from prison gangs, violent convicts, even before the arrival of prison gangs on the scene. For instance, future honorary Mexican Mafia godfather Joe Morgan was sent there supposedly as the youngest prisoner ever in the latter part of 1946 when he was only 17 years old, serving a murder beat for the death of a husband of Joe's older female lover. Evidently, she seduced Joe when he was only 15, eventually convinced him to kill her husband, and then testified against him. Some pegged, no pun intended, Joe as a rat because he implicated her in the plot, but I'm sure he was just trying to get a lighter sentence, like most do, on the advice of their defense attorneys for their case. Joe put in more work than almost anybody I know, proved himself at San Quentin and Folsom, had La Cosa Nostra, Mexican drug connections, so I know that those criticizing him would not have done so to his face when he was alive. I can tell you that he was one of the most respected and feared cons in the system, and is mentioned in numerous C files, central files, that often contain a large confidential section when it comes to prison gangs. Miami needed him more than he needed them, and he joined them much older than others did. As stated in my DVI video, the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M, started in the late 1950s. They began to impact San Quentin, where Bill Hankins started off as a corrections officer in late 1957, the year of La M's birth. He soon became a yard sergeant, and in the early 1960s soon began documenting them, when most prison administrators scoffed at any mentioning of a Mexican Mafia even being in existence. In particular, his posthumous book Alpha Guard, actually written by a ghostwriter, seems to have followed the path of Richard a.k.a. Richie a.k.a. Dogface Ruiz more than most. Ruiz was the crime partner of Rodolfo Chang Cadena, of MA icon Rodolfo Chang Cadena, and both men were from Bakersfield. Ruiz was very active in the early days, but finally dropped out in 1980 after a near-fatal hit attempt on him at Folsom Prison. December 16, 1961, Mike Acha Ison acquired the nickname Hatchet Mike after killing inmate Thomas Devers on behalf of the Mafia in San Quentin. He was also mentioned in the murder of an inmate Bobby Lopez, who was considered to be an old-school convict enforcer, meaning he would beat people up, extort them for other cons who controlled drug and gambling operations. The yard captain told Hankins that Lopez was the meanest SOB on the yard, and that these young kids calling themselves the Mexican Mafia were just a bunch of punks. Well, I guess they were deadly punks, because they took out Lopez, who was hit with an 11-inch bone crusher. Another young gun, Rodolfo Chang Cadena, was a very good-looking kid, and relatively small in stature, so it appears that some of the older cons thought they might have their way with him. Shai is said to have killed one such sexual predator, a big black convict, whom he took out with another huge shank. Another inmate, Juan Zamipa, was popping off at the mouth all the time, but was known as being very dangerous, so very few people would confront him. Shai offered him to join their clica, but when Zamilpa continued to be belligerent and badmouth the gang, Shai killed him with the assistance of other MA members. Word was out amongst the convict population. This young Mexican Mafia was a force to be feared by all. In 1963, inmate Tony Chacon was killed between the first and second tier after his release for recreation time on San Quentin's Adjustment Center yard. This death was attributed to Richie Ruiz, one of many hits he would be involved in over the years. For instance, he and Mike Eisen hit original MA member Lito Pedrosa at San Quentin. By 1966, La MA had taken over many of the yards at Q, but faced a growing movement of Chicanos who were very upset at fellow Raza taking advantage of other Raza and preying upon them. While the Nuestra Familia Mexicana started in 1965 at Soledad Prison, as I mentioned in the last video, they had to operate in total secrecy. Several incidents led up to the infamous Shoe War of September 1968, which was basically their coming out party. This so happened to be Mexican Independence Day weekend, which is why later the NF made it their honorary birthday. Several incidents led up to this major riot. First, a prison drug dealer named Sonny Pena, who was born in New Mexico but also claimed Maravilla in East LA, was murdered by the MA's Robot Salas on February 4, 1968. Evidently, Pena dealt drugs for La MA but had burned some customers and was not paying La MA back. After this hit, the Nuestra Familia Mexicana, in particular guys like Frank P.J. Lopez and Luis Araujo, both from Maravilla, were very upset at this act of disrespect against their homeboy. Secondly, Philip Rebel Neri from Bakersfield was hit by the MA's bogus Pete Nunez and Mosca Solis in March of 1968 on the orders of Stephen Calote Amador. Neri was very close to Nuestra Familia Mexicana co-founder Chalo Hernandez, who was from the same town. Another interesting detail for later Associate Warden and Deputy Director Tony Casas, rest in peace, was that Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena went out with Neri's sister, and Neri went out with Cadena's sister Cecilia. After the death of Pena and the hit on Neri, Texas syndicate inmates formed an alliance with the Nuestra Familia Mexicana and some of the Maravillas. The yard was tense. And finally, on September 14, 1968, a dispute evolved between Mexican Mafia member Robert Robot Salas from Hazard in East Los versus Hector Mad Dog Padilla, twice convicted murderer from San Jose, California. Salas's crime partner, Carlos Pieface Ortega, had stolen a pair of shoes from Padilla, but they did not fit, so he gave them to Salas as a gift. Morning yard, Padilla confronted Salas as being a cell thief, which is one of the worst things you can do, and this polarized the yard. At afternoon release, Padilla, who was drunk on Pruno, was stabbed by a robot in San Quentin's Alpine section on the 5th tier. Padilla's cellie, Manuel Benito Romero, was stabbed once by Robot after he came to Padilla's rescue. Robot was caught by officers at approximately 3:05 p.m. after he ditched his shank. Later on that evening, more fights broke out between the MA and NF. At this time, there were only 4 MA members left in general population: Ponce Amado, Capi Pacini, Tati Torres, and Frog Valdez. The next day, Sunday, September 15th, the fighting spread. Major rioting broke out with at least 22 inmates being wounded. Staff identified many of the Mexican inmates fighting, including Torres, Amado, who fought hand-to-hand combat with Nuestra Familia Mexicana leader Juan Lips Valdez, and Nuestra Familia Mexicana inmates Pollo Montoya, Marty Agüero, and Robert Babo Sosa killed MA affiliate and Diamond Street gang member Cricket Gallegos. The most accurate date on the organized formation of the Aryan Brotherhood that I have heard is that they started in San Quentin in January 1967 after a white inmate, Robert Holderman, was killed by black inmates. The next day, a large riot broke out between the two races. Soon, the Aryan Brotherhood had a group at Folsom Prison as well as other joints, and usually were allies of the Mexican Mafia. 1968 to 1974, 154 inmates were killed in the CDC system, many who belonged to prison gangs. As these incidents broke out at San Quentin, Sergeant Hankins was joined by investigators Lloyd Smitty Smith and Lawrence Smokey Thomas, and all three began gathering intelligence in the late 1960s, which came in handy when they all joined the California Gang Task Force led by Monterey Park PD Sergeant Robert Morrell in the 1970s. Their documentation and training materials were so good that it was part of my gang training at the Corrections Academy and during my orientation at Folsom State Prison in 1987. May 11, 1971, white prisoner William Hanson was killed. Tyler D. Bingham, also known as the Hulk, stabbed a black inmate in retaliation and suffered a stab wound in the process on his right leg. Total, 4 inmates were stabbed that day, and TDB was shipped off to Folsom Prison, where he remained a major figure for several years. December 28, 1971, Arnold Clive Abel from Los Angeles was found dead in his east cell block. Witnesses identified Manuel the Mad Korean Nerva and Mo Farrell as leaving Abel's cell prior to the discovery of his body. The two mafiosos were cuffed up and taken to El Hoyo, the hole, at Seg. Witnesses later recanted their story, and the two suspects were cut loose back to general population. Billy Buzzard Harris from San Jose, who was one of the participants in the January 1970 correctional training facility incident at Soledad, whereby 3 blacks were killed, was attacked in around 1974 in San Quentin by 4 or 5 blacks who stabbed him in the neck. It is my understanding that during this incident, fellow AB John Butch Calfee hid in his cell, which was considered to be an act of cowardice. He was later strangled, beaten, and a pencil driven through his eye, and almost stabbed to death at San Quentin's North Cell Block on December 26, 1974, by Ronald Scalp Hunter Krueger and Calfee's sponsor into the brand, Robert Blinky Griffin. There are several AB in these pictures that I'm showing here at San Quentin in the early days, and I think I've marked most of them correctly. Police and Fire Publishing says that is not Tommy Silverstein up front in the group shot and was actually a guy named Kenny, an AB associate. Perhaps they're right. If anybody knows the true identity of Kenny, I'd sure like to know, so I can correct it on my collection. I was told that it was Tommy by a usually reliable source, but then again, I've had several people tell me that this was Barry Mills at Folsom when it was actually Bobby Moore at Folsom Prison. That's okay, I can admit when I'm wrong. Not sure that everybody on YouTube can say that. I have a lot of pictures in my collection, and I try to stay as accurate as possible, but I do make mistakes. Since the September 1968 shoe war, dozens have been hit or killed on both sides. In 1970, Nuestra Familia Mexicana founder Gonzalo Chalo Hernandez was hit by la M at Q, and original founding member Bruce Warrow Morgan was hit by them on March 17, 1970. There were some peace efforts, such as the Pinto Support Group/Club Empleo, which stood for El Mexicano Preparado, Listo, Educado y Organizado. But these efforts were largely unsuccessful. For instance, Marcus Tarzan Castaneda de Pomona 12th Street, seen in the Empleo group picture, was hit by La M. Once again, back then, there was really no north or south. There were Mexican Mafia members from the north, and there was no West Familia members from the south. Today, 12th Street and virtually all of the Southern California Latino gangs run under the Sureño umbrella, who are loyal to the Mexican Mafia. However, up in Northern California, there are quite a few Sureño gangs. By the way, I'd like to give a shout out here and prayers for Roberto Rob Alvarez, who is from Mexico, a Sureño group in Santa Rosa, and later became a camarada. If you haven't had a chance yet, check out his YouTube channel, Misled Loyalty. He has some really good stories on there and lessons many can learn from. Peace efforts were made by some CDC officials and even a few Mexican Mafia and West Familia and Maravilla members in late 1970, and some ceasefires of sorts took place for a short while. But this law was followed at the end of 1971 and heated up significantly in 1972, such as when La M hit Daniel Woodsy Reyes and Death Row Joe at San Quentin on April 4th, 1972. 6 days later, the NF hit MA member Louis Valenzuela from Primera Flats at Quilmas. In July 1972, the Aryan Brotherhood's Danny Dog Rawlinson and La M's Chavo Perez hit NF soldiers Juan Santos and Leonard Arias at San Quentin. Arias was later finished off by La M at the Hatchet in October of that year. The Aryan Brotherhood and their enemy allies in the NF fought in a large skirmish July 28, 1972. NF shot caller Robert Daira Medina killed Mexican Mafia associate Frank Quemado Venegas on October 17, 1972. And other assaults and murders took place at other institutions during this time period. This intense 4-year blood feud convinced CDC to again try to arrange peace talks between the different prison gangs. And an NF boxer by the name of Fast Eddie Valdez wrote Cheyenne Cadena a letter on September 16, 1972, the 4th anniversary of the shoe war. and Cadena proposed that there be a ruling commission made up of 12 equal reps for La M and for the NF at the main CDC institutions to mediate disputes between the two rival gangs. Cadena's efforts did not sit well with many of the hotheads on both sides. Steve Calote Amador protested Cadena's peace efforts and encouraged to continue on the NF. There is some evidence that longtime convict and honorary godfather Joe Cuculosio Morgan was also against making any deals with the hated NF. Joe had been released to the streets in September 1972, but stayed in close contact with his Emmy brothers inside and out. Like I said, he had connections everywhere and used them. On December 12, 1972, NF member Michael Guerrero Nolan was murdered by La M at San Quentin. Morgan may have sabotaged the talks by giving Manuel Joker Rodriguez and his MA crew permission to hit the Aranda brothers at 1300 hours yard release at Chino, December 15, 1972. However, he did not have Cadena set up to be killed, like it shows in American Meat. Cadena was treated like a son by Joe Morgan, who did time with Cadena at San Quentin and Folsom. It was Cadena who pushed for Morgan to be allowed by the brothers, the Canales, into La M, even though he was 100% white. Most likely it was Morgan's opinion too shy. I warned you not to trust those guys, carnal. Cadena was killed by the NF at Chino's Palm Hall on December 17, 1972, after being pulled down from Folsom Prison for peace talks. CDC staff support, as well as radical left lawyers such as Donna James, who, interesting to me, later married Calote Amador with Joe Morgan's approval, as seen here. February 1976, Jesse Fryho died of a heroin overdose at San Quentin. Chewy was very close to MA heavyweights such as Robot Salas, Big Pelon, and had a large drug connection down in Baja that was often used by individuals such as Joe Morgan. Before we end today, and you know I sometimes do preach, but try not to be too long-winded or too self-righteous. I can't tell you how to live. I try to live my life the best I can. I try not to be a hypocrite, use religion as a crutch, or use it to somehow justify or subconsciously erase all my guilty sins. But I know some people do, and it makes them feel better. And Jesus did say that he would erase all your sins if you just believed in him. I am more spiritual than religious, and believe every man, every woman needs to take accountability for their actions, and needs to have a positive belief system to guide them through life, or they will be like a ship in the stormy seas without a rudder. They will drift off course and perhaps fatally crash on the rocks. Please come back for part 2. This has been Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.